Hey, Mike.
Hey, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, yeah. How's it
Nice.
going?
It's going well. How you doing today, Arthur?
Doing well. Thanks for taking the time to chat a little bit about your background.
Sure. Happy to join. Yeah, I'm out here on the West Coast and you're on the East Coast, correct?
Yep, yep. So I'm in New York. You're whereabouts on the West Coast are you, Mike?
Oh, born and raised in kind of Southern California and now living in Northern California. So San Jose, heart of Silicon Valley here.
Is the rivalry as big as they say it is between NorCal and SoCal?
I'm not going to comment too hard, but they do feel like two different states at times, yes.
Gotcha. Is the South trying to secede?
Nice. Nice. Well, it's cool. I'm glad to chat with you today, buddy.
Yep, yep. Awesome. So perfect segue
Mhm,
into your career path. So
mhm.
you've had an interesting career path, Mike. You've started off in the photography space, eventually getting onto Shark Tank as a finalist, then doing design and UX at a bunch of different brands. Could you walk us through your journey?
Yeah, no, definitely. I went to a design school early on in the late 90s, and mastered in kind of digital photography and web design. And that was kind of the infancy of the web. And I just, instead of going to work, there wasn't much work out that time. And so I started my own company, started a web development agency. Ran it for a good decade, sold it to my business partner, and kind of moved on to a few other startups and ventures, sold them, and eventually found my way up north about 5 years ago to head UX and design for Walmart and their subsidiary VUDU, which is their digital movie and TVs division.
Wow, that's exciting.
Oh,
I'd love to dig into your work running your own company. What were some of
sure.
the lessons you picked up doing running your own startup and pitching on Shark Tank? It's not something you hear very often from somebody in the UX world.
Yeah, no, definitely. There's all kinds of lessons, lots of kind of generic analogies out there. A lot, from the book like Lean Startup and how to make it quick and fail quickly was a huge one. It's a lot different when it's your own money too. You know what I mean? You're not you see your bank account bleeding, whether it's going through salaries or
Yeah.
or engineering or getting stuff built, advertising costs, all that stuff. And so the biggest lesson I learned was obviously to fail as quick as possible, and or prove it or what you're doing is viable, and figure out how to become profitable. It comes down a little bit down the road, but make a little, make your first dollar, then keep making more dollars. Right.
That's
Mhm.
awesome. So when you some of these lessons and this mindset of being entrepreneurial and, for all lack of a better word, getting shit done,
Mhm.
is that something that's carried through and bled over into when you were doing UX and going into that world? Because a lot of UX folks that I interact with,
Mhm.
part of their job is figuring out which designs to build and why,
Mhm.
but the other part of it is convincing all the other stakeholders that their way to do it is the way to do it, and to have the data to back it up would be
Yeah,
the
no,
best path forward.
the key word there is data. Early on, we used to kind of draw what looked pretty and designers what they liked, and then tried to sell it upstream. Sell it to CEOs and stakeholders and stuff. It's way different these days. I would not team up with anybody or any company that didn't have UX research as a foundation. Or part of the core principles that in design, you don't have to be a UX researcher as a designer or UX, professional, but you need to be mindful and empathetic enough to listen to the customer and unbiased enough to know that, hey, there's two or three ways to kind of design things, and then maybe your way or your initial or your favorite way to design stuff in UX wasn't the most viable method. So that's some of the big takeaways for UXers these days is to be completely open-minded, unbiased, and empathetic listening to the user.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So digging a bit more into that empathy and listening to those users. When you're running your own company, I bet part of the beginning process was figuring out your product market fit, figuring out what your user types are, what do they care about, what are their wants and needs and motivations. How did you tackle that back? We're kind of switching gears back to when you were running
Sure.
your previous company. How did you figure all of that out?
Yeah, it's the same philosophy I actually start with today. Whether I'm building updates to the product detail page for a Walmart.com piece, or I was, starting a new venture, building an application for my own, entrepreneurialism. There's three major questions here: is, who's the customer? Right? What problem are you solving, and what's the outcome? Right now, we start with those three things. Like, who are you building this for? Is it viable? Do they need it? What are you solving? And a great way to just go look up startup ideas is just be listening in Reddit and LinkedIn. What are people complaining about from a business perspective and solving their problems? Right? There's this silly robots cartoon 3D animation from like the 90s, and the entrepreneur has this saying, says find a need, fill a need, but it's super basic, and it fully is evident in actually starting anything. And then then what is the outcome? What are you building here? Are you building a product, a feature, an app? What I mean? Like, are there specific portions of things that are needed, right? But those three basic principles, whether you're building an entire business, an application, or just a feature of an application, all are foundational elements to start with.
So it seems like a really big theme here I'm hearing, Mike, is figuring out what your potential customers or current customers want, really digging in and listening and really digging into what they want and why they want it. What are their
Yep.
motivations?
Yep.
What's your intent as a designer building what they want? Uh, if there's any example, even if it's not concrete to a specific company,
Mhm.
where you had two different versions of a feature or a user flow, and one set of users said go to version A, and the other set of users went to version B. What were some of the metrics and motivations that drove you to pick version A over version B, whatever that was?
Yeah. Yeah, so without digging into any specific feature, when you're doing testing, there's literal like physical data you can get in analytics
Hmm.
of conversions, right?
Right.
Did they get through the happy path quick? How did they convert? And what is the physical data of that conversion? These are tests that I'd usually run live. Right, and say you have whatever 100,000 users, and you pick 10,000 or 1,000 to send this particular A/B test to, so you can get
Hmm.
live data and results. The live
Yep.
data tells you a lot more than what I'm going to talk about next, which is in just user testing, and you're doing maybe some screen recordings, or you're going through prototypes and not a live site. We'll do that, and we'll watch, and we'll listen to what people are talking about as they go through it. We'll have a small select group of 10, 15 people running this A/B test, right?
Hmm.
But people can lie. Right.
Right.
And data doesn't always lie as much. And so those are two different types of approaches. One is use a live A/B test to get real analytics from it, or two, run like a user recorded, remote session or on-site session to actually physically watch and listen to what they're doing. Right.
So that's super interesting. First of all, users not always being honest about what their intentions are and how they truly feel.
What do you
Uh,
mean? People are honest all the time, 100% of the time, right?
so I imagine, as a designer, that makes your job really difficult. But at the same time, from what you're telling me, it looks like there's the qualitative data digging into why people like a feature.
Mhm.
So using things like session recordings or user feedback is a way to understand why they like the button being placed up here versus in the top left corner. But the raw metrics and the raw data is how many people converted.
Mhm.
So you can have how many people converted, but you can't understand why. And
On the
that,
quantitative side, yes.
yep, exactly. So
Yeah.
from what I'm hearing also, it part of your process, once you determine the product market fit and really figure out the personas, is once you're testing two different versions of either a flow or a feature, is to dig into the data and run both hard data analytics and qualitative analytics so that your team would be able to figure out what to build and why.
Yep, exactly. Like the quick takeaway here from anybody in UX that's listening or that you're about to talk about this is we spent the majority of our conversation talking about like why data matters, and
Mhm.
data driven design should be some foundational element in your toolkit somehow, right? To some degree. That's one of the biggest takeaways here.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So definitely important to have a data-driven mindset. But something that I've read and I'm hearing a lot as well is sometimes you can have, is it possible to have too much data to just be swamped by data and not be able to sort through it? Like when
Of
does
course,
data start
it's the
becoming like the matrix?
look. It's the same thing of over architecting or over designing.
Mhm.
I've had designers come to me with like 100 mocks before, or 50 mocks, where you're like,
Wow.
you had it at 4 or you had it at 3. Like you're spinning down a rabbit hole at some point. At some
Mhm.
point they just in this way, it helps to have like if you're in the office, which we aren't anymore, so it's now
Right.
remote, is just to
Yep.
have some hallway testing. Literally, is just start bouncing ideas off of folks that you respect, regardless of their profession. Like say, hey, you got a good opinion, you got good eye. What do you think about this? Think about this. Like all of my teams, and the last team, the running here at VUDU here was 22 designers, and so they consistently interact with each other. Now it's on Slack and remotely and stuff, and
Mhm.
get feedback and sharing and stuff. But that's the point is. Yes, of course, you can get too much data overload, or you can be looking at too many numbers and just can't see past the fact that, hey, like you got to get it out, and maybe you're like, we're overthinking this, right?
Mhm.
And that's the same, you don't want a project taking 6 months when it should be taken 6 days, right?
Yep. Yep.
Mhm.
Yeah,
That's a
it's
balance. It's a hard question to answer, but you got to find a balance, right?
yep. I mean, or you can be the director of UX and you can be like Neo. You can be the chosen one and you can see the code and you'll be able to see through everything. And when Mr. Smith pops out, you can code him out, remove him from the matrix.
uh, I work in movies and TV, so I appreciate the Matrix analogy. Like we could talk half hour about Matrix 4 coming out. Why Lawrence Fishburne is maybe in or out of the film here.
So, do you think somebody like Keanu, like Neo, a good UX designer, should they be like Neo in the sense of they really stand out, they have crazy, wacky designs, or should they be somebody more like Morpheus that has a design philosophy and they really stick to it and that ethos follows them no matter where they go?
Yeah, I know. So we can back into that question with like what when I look at design portfolios or online portfolios, and really what hiring managers are looking for, what you're looking for even after you're hired as an individual, and you're just looking for creativity and a diverse array of it. You're just not a one-hit wonder, and you're just drawing, everything is always blue, or what I mean, or
Yep.
I'm the rounded corner guy. I'm the rounded corner guy, right?
Yep,
But
yep.
you're looking at some diversity in fields that you've worked in, right? Diversification in application software, that you could be as skilled in Sketch as you are in Figma, and then
Mhm.
understand some testing tools, like usability here, usabilia, or like usertesting.com,
Mhm.
and having a wide array of like a software skill set. Also looking for that they've kept up on some trends, that they're following along in some, they're not drawing in an archaic style, like the
Mhm.
skeuomorphism of like the first Apple iOS, where everything is just big and 3D, and what I mean, and
Yep.
dated looking, is that they've progressed a little. And that they fall around some stuff like some popular blogs or popular designer artists. Follow, there's a great app called Musely that keeps you abreast of some of the latest design trends. You can get a Chrome plugin and it starts showing you all kinds of new stuff.
Mhm.
So that's what you kind of look for, is like diversity and creativity, and a progression in education there.
Yeah, so it really sounds like if you're, I'm going to go back to the Matrix here, just for
Mhm.
the viewers that may not be as savvy in the UX space. but have probably seen The Matrix. Back when Neo was learning martial arts and every other program from flying a helicopter and everything in between, the same way that he did that, if you want to be successful in the world of UX, you got to constantly level up. You need to be learning new tools, new trends, and you either got to keep up or you fall behind and you're left in the dust.
Absolutely. If you're still doing everything in Adobe Photoshop right now, you're losing traction on everything new and quicker and faster that's happening in the world.
And something I was curious about from a UX perspective, how has COVID changed the way that UX designers have approached the way they build things for everybody in, in different industries, whether it's retail, Walmarts and VUDUs of the world, or
Mhm.
somebody maybe even more on the B2B software side, so building a new interface within a business tool?
Yeah, no, that's a great question that's relevant right now. The answer is not just exclusive to UX folks. It applies to pretty much everybody, and a lot of people in the tech industry, or product managers down to engineers and stuff, of how they approach stuff. One is you absolutely have to be like excessively communicative now, like digitally, whether that's in Slack or whether that's in email or whether it's text or on phone calls or whatever, that you're inclusive to more individuals that you may have been speaking to earlier. You're adding more people to your threads and your channels or whatnot, and telling more, even if they already knew it, right? And so that over communication is a huge thing. It takes a little more time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Especially if you're typing. Learn to type faster, right?
Very practical advice.
Take that Neo skill and dump it in for typing, speed typing into your noggin there, and then go from there. So that's a huge one. And then just staying positive. It's chaos in my household here. I got kids running around and stuff, and I don't apologize for my children photobombing our sessions, or big meetings with GMs or CEOs. It's just
yep.
like patient and creative as far as right now, there's nothing you can control this type of environment, and just at the outcome of it, do your job, do a great job, and try to enjoy life here.
Yeah, for sure. To clarify that question, what I meant to ask was from the user's perspective. So for the end user who's
Mm-hmm.
using VUDU or Walmart or SurveyMonkey or another tool, how has designing for them changed in the way you approach the research aspect? So building what they want, all the way down to how are we moving things along the roadmap? Pre-COVID, build everything. Just go for it. Post-COVID, let's make sure everything is working and build everything for business continuity. How has your process changed, or some of the other UX folks in your network? How's their process changed for building great UX designs and their research process overall with COVID around?
So probably what I'm getting to here is the process hasn't changed. You have a solid process. You're just much more digital now. You're much more collaborative. You're using a lot more tools online, collaborative spreadsheets before, that maybe you weren't using before. But what has changed for certainly is the product features and the features and things that you're working on. Businesses are intelligently shifting gears and prioritization on the things that will help the end user during this stay-at-home crisis. The Walmart, for example, working hard on same-day grocery shipping. That just came out in the news a couple weeks ago, and then obviously 2-day shipping. Netflix and VUDU are working to get movies in theaters that were supposed to launch and partnering with the studios to get them into theaters. And so we're building. VUDU launched a product back in April called Premium Video on Demand, which is little tagline was theater at home. Right. And so we worked on a product on how to get those movies Scoob was one of them. Trolls 2, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure 3 is coming up in a couple weeks here. Right? They're supposed to go to theaters, and Disney hugely announced, right, that
Yep, yep.
Mulan will only show on will show on Disney Plus, not in theaters, which is it's a big deal. So the processes have just kind of like got more meticulous and like data minded, as far as like a lot more like time intensiveness on the computer, but the features are the more important things, what the companies are actually putting out there. Right?
Yep. So it sounds like a lot of focus on digital collaboration, at the same time, really listening to the market and adapting. So if folks can't go to movie theaters anymore, you gotta really shift it. It seems like a big trend across industries is that shift to digital, to curbside, at home, in PJs, TV on, type of environment that we're all in.
Yeah,
So
back to that silly robots quote: "Have a need, fill a need." It's still it absolutely applies in situations like this.
yeah,
Like, what do we need working at home with our families here?
yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
One very quick question for somebody who might be starting out in the UX world. Would you suggest that they join a smaller UX team, maybe in a bigger company, or a join a team that's maybe in a more startup-like environment, and be maybe a team of 2 or 3 as a first career step? So maybe somebody who's fresh out of college or fresh out of moving from photography or something else. What would be the best path? And if there isn't the best path, what are kind of the pros and cons of each?
Yeah, no, definitely. I've been talking and mentor a lot of kind of like folks lately who are just beginning their careers in UX, and the quick answer is get any job you can, right? Especially in a climate like this, big, small, smaller team, bigger team, whatever. Apply to as many things as you can, because some hiring managers have written some silly job description, requirements out there. I just saw one the other day that said must have 5 years of Adobe XD experience, and Adobe XD launched 2 years ago. It just like, and the number one complaint from folks that, like who don't have experience, like says, I need experience to get experience, right? I have a teenage daughters in that exact boat right now.
Yep.
And what you do is you go out and redesign something, go redesign Netflix, post a case study on your site. You could, hiring managers and designers, design, managers can still see through that creative thinking, whether it was an actual project or not. I've hired several people in the last couple of years who never had a UX job before, right? Either coming from a different industry or a different background or different that. So the long answer summed up is get what you can, and fight hard to try and get something out there.
Yeah, and building something, even if it's a mock-up or a redesign, that just sounds like a super out-of-the-box way to really stand out. So, if I was applying for a job as a UX designer, VUDU, just redesign the Android app, move around the flows, be like, if I was on the team, this is how I would redo it, and this is why, and just send it to the hiring manager.
Absolutely. And a lot of people, as you're crafting these portfolios and stuff, it's not always enough to just post up a pretty picture of a redesigned homepage. Accompany that with a bunch of text and pre-mock-ups and earlier versions, and and showing steps on how you got to that location, right? That it's super important to understand like your design thinking and the process and how you got from A to B, right? And regardless of what was a real project or not, for a viable company, that design thinking is actually what you look into, as hiring managers as what's equally as important as the design itself.
Absolutely. So it looks like the thought process is just as important as the final product, and that's a really, really good segue into, Mike, the way that technology and some of the tools that you've used day to day I'm curious how they have helped shape the way that you research and design stuff at VUDU, and other brands as well that you've worked with in the past. If you could walk
Yeah.
us through a little bit.
No, quicker, faster, easier. Like the when Sketch took over 5 years ago, and most of us kind of adapted to it. There's the biggest reason was because we were heavy into Photoshop, and it was raster based versus vector based, which means like you couldn't scale outputs very easily. And so with Sketch, you could design 3 times faster and then output like all the assets. For Android mobile systems or iOS is 3 different levels of export. With clicks of a button versus having to write actions or scale it down in Photoshop. And so like hugely the apps and Figma's doing this now. Figma's like a nice progression for designers because it's very collaborative and it's completely online. And so you're designing in real time and able to collaborate and share and look at and notate. And so you're taking away the hurdle of having to email somebody, or of having to communicate with somebody in a slower fashion. So the apps are getting more intelligent and faster and better, and they're still reasonably priced. I mean, Sketch is $100 is a flat fee, right? Versus Photoshop, you're paying $15 a month on a monthly basis, right?
Absolutely. Were there any specific tools around research and feedback and session recording that you may have either dabbled in or you found that were helpful for you back when you were designing things at various companies?
Yeah, definitely. So highly addicted to usertesting.com, and it's basically a network of 100,000 folks that you can say, hey, I want a certain, a gender, age, likability or preferences, and physically send them your product with an NDA, and they'll session record, feedback on, either the prototype or mock-ups or designs for design or usability testing, right? SurveyMonkey is huge, man. So simple, just to, send a quick, rapid fire, like, surveys out to people and stuff. And then like, maybe a good segue to talk about usability here, right?
Yeah. So super quick, Usabilla, they're a real-time user feedback platform. SurveyMonkey acquired them because they couldn't make their own version of it. And it's been around for a decade, but some of the top brands in the world like Nike are using it. Nike and Capital One are using it to solve some of the biggest challenges you might have, particularly relevant now as, going back to some of our earlier conversations, as brands really shift to digital and getting a pulse on customers across their journey is all the more important. But just jumping back to your process, sounds like the tools are a pretty big part of it, but at the same time, you can't let the tools control you because then you just turn into Skynet. And as a UX researcher, designer, you can't really be that way to be successful.
No, it's back to finding a balance. Not over designing, not overthinking. Like the data, not overusing tools. Right. Get something out, get something into the wild, get it. Get it feedback, get it viable. Right. Get it effective. Right. Effective UX. There's a kind of way to explain this here is like user experience. It either works or it doesn't. But then there's degrees of working or not working, right? So it's either ineffective or effective, right? And then there's the effective side that you can get more progressive or bleeding edge or cutting edge, or cutting edge, bleeding edge, right down the road where bleeding edge is where Apple's at in design, right? I always push us to be at least effective, right? And not let tools get in your way, but push more towards the progressive side, to challenge yourself, challenge the norm a little bit or whatever. Right? So some advice there. Yeah.
Awesome. And if you had a crystal ball and you could see where UX is headed in the next decade, what do you think some of the trends overall are going to be in the industry and the space? And what have you seen really big picture change in the last decade in the world of UX and UX research? Super big picture. So this could be an hour-long conversation. So
if I had that crystal ball or Biff from Back to the Future, sports almanac, so I could predict who is going to win the next World Series. Maybe it wouldn't be in UX, but It is really interesting. There is UX, 5-10 years ago just wasn't even a thing. We were called, webmasters or web guys or
Wow.
web folks. So niching into the fact that, hey, it is important to pay attention to the user experience, is the thing. It's segmenting and getting bigger, where some people are now just niching off into just the UI portion of UX, or just the UX portion, or just UX research portion of it. Stuff.
Hmm.
There's also a new trend, or a trend you'll start hearing, called product experience design, like PXD, right? And that's somebody who is equally skilled at product management as they are in user experience, and they understand like product management, and business requirements and product requirements and vetting out and competition analysis and getting much more, like heavier out into the data and but also can, draw their butt off, right? And they visually can render exactly what they're trying to, put on paper and stuff. That's like ultimate hybrid, for a bunch of skills and stuff, and not something we can all do. I went to an art school versus, I know some product managers who went to Harvard. Those are completely different institutions and ways of education. But there is becoming a much more of a need for this down the future of like product experience designers, even to the minorest degrees,
Yeah, so it sounds like the biggest trend you're seeing is folks that are more business oriented, mixing together art and business,
Correct.
and being both creatives and numbers guys and gals at the same time. They can draw the most beautiful mock-ups with the prettiest rounded corners, but at the same time, they'll dig right into Tableau or an Excel spreadsheet and tell you, this is where the market's at. This is what all the competitors are doing. This is where we fall short. This is where we need to improve. And they can really speak to both the product folks, to the designers, to the finance folks, and everybody in between, and sell whatever their version of the dream is.
You got it. This is right brain, left brain, balance here, right? But and obviously there's no, like, you're not going to be 100% great at both, and there'll be degrees of, maybe you're 60-40 or 40-60 on either side of the fence there and stuff. But the opportunity to kind of merge the two is coming more into fruition here these days.
Absolutely. And if you were to become somebody in that right brain, left brain field, where do you see your future in the next decade or so?
Oh, me personally?
Yeah, just curious.
When airlines open up, I'm going to Bali to go surfing for a month, man.
That sounds like a game plan.
That's my first goal and stuff. It's funny. I am like that a little bit, but I'm actually a little bit more these days on the business side. I enjoy kind of the creative leadership, strategy, management side of the business, and having to dust off and practice, illustrating and rounding corners and making things beautiful, but it's I'll probably be pushing more towards the leadership side, like looking to kind of build, grow, design teams, inspire, mentor. That's kind of like it's always been a passion of mine.
That's awesome. So giving back, but at the same time, still staying sharp, staying creative, and maybe bringing back some of those startup days, but it being an intrapreneur more than an entrepreneur.
There you go.
Awesome. So just to kind of wrap this up, the last question I have for you and for the viewers, for somebody who is a budding UXer, whether they're a designer, a product designer, or a future head of UX or head of design, what are some really great resources, even if it's one or two, that you'd recommend folks staying abreast of to keep up with the Joneses a little bit, whether it's reading content or consuming it through something like a podcast or a book?
Yeah. All of the above, man. Your favorite way to digest information, whether it be podcasts, there's a ton of great ones out there. There's, if you're looking at, reading online, there's, tons of great blogs, and it should be inspirational towards what you're into, I'm into movies and TV tech, and so I'll follow Netflix's blog. They publish some of the greatest, A/B test. I'll just write out for the public to look at. So here's how we're like changing our algorithm to make movie posters different. Like so, like pick whatever industry it inspires you. Like there's somebody in there designing for that or drawing for that or not. And then obviously things that are just keep you healthy and happy. Right. For me, it's surfing. So I'm looking at, like watching, videos on WSL or see where surf land is right now, where the biggest waves are coming through these days. Right. And so like, that just keeps you, happy and healthy and creative, not being just 100% focused on, your career here.
Yeah, for sure. So have some fun and read about what you're passionate about, and everything else will transfer over by a process of emulsion.
Exactly. Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, Mike, thanks for your time today. And once that surfing and design podcast comes out, I'll make sure to tell the world about it. But it's really been a pleasure. We will share this everywhere over LinkedIn and write it up a little bit. And for the viewers or the listeners, we'll come up with a short list of very super short list of podcasts and blogs that folks can just look into if they're passionate or exploring the world of UX.
Yeah, absolutely. Arthur, it's been a pleasure. I appreciate, you hanging out with me here, and it was a fun Q&A. Thanks, man.
For sure. Go catch a wave. It was great chatting.
You too. Take care, man.
Take care.